Well, Diana, I am so happy to host you on my podcast show, Trips and Global on Wheels. Thank you so much for being willing to come on.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, of course. So I'm going to read the bio you sent over just so listeners have some background, and then we will continue from there. Okay?
Okay, sounds good.
So Diana Pastora Carson has been an elementary educator for over 30 years and co-teaches a disability and society course at San Diego State University. She is a consultant and educator on diversity as it relates to disability and is the author of several articles and books, including Beyond Awareness, bringing disability into diversity work in K-12 schools and communities, and children's book Ed Roberts, Champion of Disability Rights and Beyond Disability Awareness, an Educator's Guide. Diana is known for her powerful keynote presentations and educational workshops related to disability awareness and inclusive teaching practices. Her disability awareness work in schools has earned her statewide PTA recognitions in the area of advocacy and outreach, as well as her elementary school's designation of Teacher of the Year. In addition to a TED Talk and her award-winning podcast, Beyond Awareness, Disability Awareness That Matters. Diana has been featured in several articles and other podcasts. She served 2 terms on the board of directors at the Disability Rights California and currently serves as a board member of Disability Voices United. Although Diana experiences disability herself, she credits her passion for this work to her brother, Joaquin Carson, who endured years of segregated schooling and subsequent institutionalization. She takes the most pride in knowing that after many years of fighting for his release from an institution, Joaquin now lives a life of self-determination, inclusion, and quality in the community as her next door neighbor. Along this journey to inclusion, Diana and Joaquin have become advocates for safe community inclusion, especially for people who experience body dysregulation and as it relates to healthcare access and access to durable accommodations, a term coined by Diana's family. Wow, you've done so much great work, Diana.
Thank you. There's so much still to do, right? As you know.
Yes, there is so much still to do. So as we read just from your bio, I know you just said you also identify as a person who experiences disabilities. So would you feel comfortable sharing with us what
Oh,
those
of course.
disabilities are and how that has impacted your life?
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. Um, so I actually didn't identify as a person with a disability until a few years ago when, and I've always had this condition, but I never had a name for it. And I didn't really, it didn't really get to the point that it got to until 2020. My condition is a vestibular migraine condition, which affects my balance, and I'm very sensitive to lighting and motion. And it affected my ability to teach, and I retired early. And it wasn't, I never, even then, when I retired early on disability retirement, I didn't still consider myself as a member of the disability community, even though I'm so passionate about disability rights and disability access. And it wasn't until I spoke with Judy Human, who I know you also have spoken with, and she told me, Diana, you need to claim your disability. And I said, but I feel like so many other people, you know, need that, deserve that more than I do. I feel like I can get by, and she said, we need everybody who experiences disability to claim that they're part of the disability community. And she really spoke to my heart. And since then, I identify as a person with a disability, and proudly disabled, um, and in solidarity with people of diverse disability experiences. So that's when I recognized that my experience was also a valid disability experience.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I just gave a lecture on invisible disabilities, and I
Hmm.
know sometimes people with invisible disabilities, they tread a fine line, right? Of feeling
Yeah,
like when they want to be included, feeling like an imposter. Maybe it's not severe enough in their mind or
right.
something. And but the more we talk about it, Judy's right. The more we share our stories, the
Hmm.
more other people will have the courage to share it
Yes.
too. And
Right.
yeah,
And
so
to advocate for access.
exactly,
Right.
exactly,
Right.
and so that's why it's also so crucial. And so speaking of advocating, I know that you were in elementary education for a very long time. So how
Yeah.
do you think being in um, elementary education for all those years, how has that made you become a more effective advocate, disability advocate, ally?
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, there's so much to my story of my perspectives and my approaches to education that revolves around my experience as a sibling for my brother and then for other people in my life that are disabled. And so I think I'll start with that if that's okay.
Yeah,
Um,
that's perfect.
yeah, so and first of all, I have to say I always point out that my brother Joaquin gives me his blessing, his permission to share our journey together.
I
He,
love that you say that. I've listened to a few of your
yes,
podcasts. I love that you take the time to say that every single time.
yeah, it's so important. My brother's self-determination and his dignity are at the forefront of everything that I do alongside him. And when he's unable to, because of his autism, which also includes a lot of body dysregulation at times if he's not feeling well with coexisting medical conditions. Um, it's just really important. I believe as a sibling, it is my responsibility to protect his dignity. And because, as you know, we live in an ableist society. And so people make assumptions about who he is. And if I just omit that he gives me permission and his blessing, um, then it just perpetuates that status quo ableist view that he needs somebody to control his life, and he needs somebody to take care of him as opposed to somebody to support him, and be an ally with him and an encourager, and all the things that we want from our friends and our family members. And so that's why I always say that. So my brother Joaquin, um, when we were in elementary school, he started going to school when he was 6 years old after a law, which you may be familiar with, called PL 94-142, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It was passed then that said all children had a right to a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. And so Joaquin got to go to school. Before that, it was just me going to school, not Joaquin. And I was so excited. I was so excited for him to get to go to school. He was going to meet my friends. He was going to make friends. I was so proud of who he was. And he was such a big part of my life. And then I get to school that day. He takes the short yellow bus to school, and I walk to school as I normally did. And I get to his classroom and I see him on the other side of this fence. And I was kind of sad, that I was divided. We were separated from each other. And I went to my classroom and I couldn't wait for the recess bell to ring because I wanted to be with my brother. And the recess bell finally rang and I run to his classroom, but I'm stopped by that big metal fence. And on the other side is Joaquin with his teacher, and she's holding his hand. And I said, "Hi, I'm here to take Joaquin out to play on the playground." And she said, "Oh, I'm sorry, you can't do that. He belongs here on this playground." And I said, I was just crushed. and my friends were with me. I had told them all about him and they were excited to meet him too. And I said, well, can then we come in and play with him on this playground? And the teacher said, no, I'm sorry, you cannot. He belongs here and you belong there. And so that was the first time in my life that I realized that my brother, although he had a right, my 7-year-old mind wasn't thinking about rights at the time, but I knew he was in school, but just because he was in school didn't mean that he got to be loved, that he got to be included, that he was valued the same way that I was as a, at the time, considered non-disabled child. And so that moment in time has always been present in my mind as an educator. When I grew up and became an educator, I knew I would never allow that to happen to one of my students. And so I was 150% committed to every child in my classroom community feeling a sense of belonging, knowing that they belong, and every child knowing that every other child in the class also belonged. And so I think that was, sometimes it's a hard line to walk, because you are in systems that do not support inclusive education at times, or there are structures in place that are so antiquated, designed 100 years ago, that do not allow for flexibility of learning styles, and of learning environments, and really truly providing access to all learners in universal ways. And so, but that has always guided me within my own classroom community. And I feel like I was kind of a rebel as an educator and I've been so lucky. I've always had administrators at the local level in my campus, who supported inclusive education, even though in my classroom, they supported it in my classroom, even though our school district, and I was actually told this by a district superintendent when I went to advocate, that we are not an inclusion district, air quotes I'm holding up for those listening and not watching. But my administrators, my principals always supported me, including children with disabilities, and even the more significantly impacting behavioral dysregulation disabilities in my classroom. So I felt very fortunate that I was able to make that difference in those students' lives.
Yeah, and they were lucky to have you as their teacher. I think
Yeah.
you're right. Thank you for sharing your vivid experience of us versus them, even as a young girl going to
Mm-hmm.
school. And I think even though we have IDEA now, there's still that us versus them as
Oh,
young
yeah.
as in elementary school. And that still persists. And that's why it's so important for you to share your story and keep doing that advocacy work. And I've read some of your children's books and sharing it with my nieces.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
yeah, and I think it'll be important for them to read. There's really so few of those types of books, so it's incredible that and needed that you wrote those books. And I hope that you'll write more.
I
So,
hope so too. Thank you.
of course, so I know autism has played a huge role in your brother's life.
Mhm.
And just going back to the basics, what is autism and how did it affect and does today affect your brother's day-to-day life?
Wow, that's a huge question. I mean, I'm not an expert in autism by any means. Let me just say that. For Joaquin, for my brother, autism, when he was growing up, he was diagnosed with early infantile autism, and the term that was used at the time was severe autism. So, you know, autism, in my mind, what I've learned about it now is that autism is a movement difference. Autism is Joaquin gets stuck. His words get stuck, his body gets stuck. And I don't know if there's cognitive processes in his mind that get stuck as well. But he's a lot of the time in a state of stuck, and anything can impact that stuckness for him. Again, I'm not an expert, but this is our experience, or my experience of my interpretation of what is happening with within his gross motor, fine motor, his communication, and just in general, what I see is that he wants to do something, but something else happens in his body, in his mind, with his words. His words get stuck. He'll say the same thing over and over. He'll desperately be trying to tell you that he's in pain. There's something wrong, something wrong. And instead, what'll come out is, I have to go, I have to go, I have to go, meaning I have to go to the bathroom. And you think he has to go to the bathroom, and you are helping him to get to the bathroom, but he starts hitting his head or screaming or being very upset, because that's not what he's trying to tell you. He's trying to tell you he's in pain. And then the next day you find out his ear's red and he's got an earache and he's got an ear infection, and you get him antibiotics, and now he's starting to feel better, So for him, there's a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? False starts. You think you know what he's trying to communicate, and then it's not what he's actually trying to communicate. And so for Joaquin, the autism that he experiences is multifaceted. It's dealing with his body, but it's also dealing with others around him who are not speaking his language, so to speak, not understanding what it is he's trying to say. And then there's the isolation and the seclusion. And when he was younger, the institutionalization and the segregated schooling he experienced that led to the institutionalization for 15 years of his life, and the abuse that went on, and just so much that he's had to deal with, while also dealing with his body's lack of ability at times, especially when he doesn't feel good. And as he's gotten older, he's now in his 50s, there are more times when he's not feeling good. And so what our primary goals are always is to provide him dignity and respect through it, and not blame him, not dismiss him and his feelings, to support him through the medical aspects, also to support his mental health and just validate him, and also to support effective communication. So Joaquin is a multimodal communicator. There's not just one way to communicate. For you and me, we can communicate pretty effectively with our words. And so for Joaquin, that doesn't always happen. He has some really good days when he's feeling really good, and he says things, and he feels so good that he was able to get it out. Like, say, a couple times he's been at where I've spoken at conferences, we co-present, and he's sitting in the front row because that's where he feels the most comfortable. And then I say something about him. I say, right, Joaquin, and he'll say, right on, baby, hit the road, Jack. And those are his favorite terms. It means I'm in agreement. Yes, yes, yes. Or he'll say his favorite quote is, steak is coming. Steak is Joaquin's metaphor. He speaks in metaphors a lot. And steak is something, when he was at the institution and we were fighting for his release, which took 3 years for us to advocate for his release from an institution, my mom, in her thick Spanish accent, asked him, Joaquinito, when you come home, what do you want mommy to make you for dinner? And Joaquin said, steak. And we didn't grow up eating steak. We ate chicken and rice and beans, traditional foods, not a lot of steak. I don't remember ever having steak. Maybe my dad had a steak every now and then. But Joaquin said very clearly, he said steak. And for the next 3 years, he kept saying, steak is coming, steak is coming, steak is coming. And, when he got out, he did have a big steak dinner. Mom kept her word. But he kept saying that steak is coming for the next month. And then he would say things like, I like steak. Steak is good. And we got to understand that what Joaquin was saying wasn't about the food steak. He was talking about his life quality. He loved his life. What he wanted was life quality. And so he still says it. And we have t-shirts for his direct support staff that say steak is coming, Team Joaquin. And it's a thing.
Wow.
It's a thing. Yes.
What a great story. And I watched your TED Talk as well, where you told your story very powerfully. And thank you so much for sharing that. I'm so glad and happy that he's released and living,
Yeah.
life in a way that gives him a lot of agency and choices, right, and options.
Yes, absolutely. Thank
So
you.
in terms, sorry, did I interrupt you?
No, I just was saying thank you for
Yeah.
for being happy about Joaquin living a life of quality with agency and choices. Yes.
Yes, I know there must be so many myths, just your experience with your brother and seeing him live life. What would you say are the top three most common and most toxic myths about people with autism?
Oh, well, one is there's this presumption of incompetence. Just because my brother's body is not cooperating with him at any given moment does not mean that he doesn't understand. It doesn't mean that he does not need to be valued and esteemed. It does not mean that he doesn't need respect. Um, and he needs to be spoken to, not about. So I think that the main one is people having this presumption that he's incompetent. Um, and let's suppose that his cognitive abilities really were, which I don't believe they are. But let's just say that they were at a 2-year-old level as he's been diagnosed. Even then, it's important to treat someone as if you presume competence. It's as Anne Donnellan, may she rest in peace, Dr. Anne Donnellan, who just passed away last month. She always said, presuming competence is the least dangerous assumption. You're causing the least amount of harm to a person by presuming competence. However, if you're always presuming incompetence, the likelihood is that you are going to cause harm to somebody's soul, to their dignity. So that's one myth, is that a person who cannot speak reliably, that they are incompetent. That is a myth. Okay. So presuming competence is important. And then the other thing I would say is that just because somebody is non-verbal, we used to say, but we prefer non-speaking. Just because somebody doesn't speak with words doesn't mean that they have nothing to say. Joaquin has a lot to say. Many of my friends who are autistic, who are non-speaking, have a lot to say. And thank goodness, so many of them have had allies and advocates with their families or their educators who have provided alternative ways for them to communicate, whether it be through typing or through assistive technology devices. But Joaquin communicates in a variety of ways. Sometimes it's through words, sometimes it's with a yes no board, sometimes it's through typing, sometimes it's through his eyes and his body language. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so powerful. You're right. Just because presuming competence. I've heard you talk about it before, and I really resonated with that. And there are so many different ways of communicating, right? Through touch, um, through connecting with animals.
Mhm.
There's so many different ways of communicating that people don't normally think about, and it's important to bring that to the surface. Um,
Yes.
so I think you through growing up with your brother have learned quite a lot about developmental disabilities personally, as well as probably professionally by now. So what do you think are some of the most effective methods to be an ally for someone with a developmental disability? If you were, and maybe you've already lectured on this and talked about this to people who don't have any type of disabilities.
How to be an ally to people with developmental and intellectual disabilities. I think a number one way is really, like I talked about with Joaquin, is protecting people's dignity and respecting them, no matter what your presumptions about them might be or could have been prior. Presuming competence, and being inclusive, uh, not being afraid. We've got so many different historical perspectives around intellectual and developmental disabilities that are very negative. And so we haven't always, although there are school systems that are being much more inclusive and embracing inclusive education, we still have so far to go. And so many of us don't have the experience of having attended classes with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and being friends with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And so we don't really think about them oftentimes when we own a business or when we work in a community environment or when we attend a religious congregation or a religious service. So I think what's really important is, in order to be an ally, is to really, not just out of charity, include other people into your world. Not just, oh, I feel sorry for them and it's the right thing to do to bring them in, like to hire somebody who has a disability, or to, invite somebody to go to your synagogue or your church or mosque or wherever you attend religious services. Not just, there's so many different things that we could do to be inclusive, but do it from a perspective of everyone belongs here. Not, I'm going to bring you, everyone should have a seat at my table. Not that. Or at our table, the normal people, air quotes again, but everybody belongs here. How could we create this work environment or this school environment or this religious community environment or neighborhood? How could we ensure that it is accessible to everybody and that everybody feels welcome here? That there are no once that we actually plan and design environments, activities, spaces in ways that have everybody feel welcome, that provide everyone access. And sometimes we don't know what that looks like. Sometimes we're still learning, and it's okay when we're still learning. But when somebody points it out to us, it's important not to be defensive about it and to say, wow, I just learned something new about how I can be more inclusive. And that creates a more welcoming environment for people, and makes it not feel like a handout, but an aha moment that, oh my gosh, I was excluding somebody. And so now I want to make it right. So I think that for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, so many more opportunities open up for them when people have a mindset that everybody belongs, no matter what their disability is. No matter, I don't even like to say no matter or in spite of, because it makes it sound like it's a negative. But in so many people's minds, if somebody's flapping their hands or making humming noises or jumping up and down, who cares? Like, that's great. That's part of their full self-expression. And if we embrace that and don't judge it, stop judging people for it, they will feel more welcome. Joaquin and many of my friends are so sensitive to people's energy around them. They know. Joaquin knows when I'm nervous or upset about something. If we go to a doctor appointment and he's getting a little bit loud, he can sense it if I start to get nervous, because I'm afraid that the nurses or the doctors or the employees are going to, tell us we have to leave or we have to quiet down. It's like, yeah, well, that's not going to happen. But so anyway, yeah, it's important for people to feel like they are valued and welcomed in an environment.
Yeah, those are great points. And I think jumping off one of the points you said is we're always learning. And I know for me, as a person with a visible disability, I'm often the only person in a wheelchair in any given room or environment. And if people with invisible disabilities don't talk about it, nobody knows. And so be willing to go into the situation of not knowing, but then
Right.
learn and then improve upon the situation. And one of the things during my previous lecture recently of how to be an ally that I recommended was to include people into the circle, no matter
Yeah.
how deviant they may be
In
showing up
your
from the
in your
mainstream.
mind, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
from their mind and also from their view of what the mainstream or what the cool kids or whatever pop
Right.
culture says is the thing to be.
Right.
And so, speaking of environments with low exposure, so how do you normalize disability to people, communities that have little exposure to disability?
So one of the ways that I do that, I mean, as an educator, now that I have retired from teaching elementary school, I still teach a disability and society class at San Diego State University. And of course, everything that we teach is in order to normalize and centralize disability in our students' minds. But I remember when I was teaching elementary school and I first got my special education credential, and I had mentors who were teaching me how to do disability awareness. Um, and I did it in all the ways that I was taught. My mentors, my master teachers did these elaborate activities with students where they would put on a blindfold on a student and say, now you know what it's like to be blind, right? Or there were, or you would sit in a wheelchair for 1 minute and then they would say, now you know what it's like to use a wheelchair. And I did these for a couple years, and then I started teaching a disability studies class. Now, I knew a lot about disabilities, the conditions, the diagnoses. As a person who got her master's in special education, I had to learn about disabilities. But what I realized when I started teaching this class at the community college level at first was that I didn't know a lot about disability. I didn't know a lot about the experience of being disabled. I didn't know a lot about being discriminated against. I didn't know about ableism. So when I was going to teach this college class, I started reading books written by disabled authors, and I started listening to well, actually I wasn't listening to podcasts at that time because I didn't know what they were. I don't think they even existed back then. Um, but I started listening to people who lived the experience of disability and were talking about disability rights and disability justice, and talking about disability from a social justice lens in general. And so it was then that I realized, oh my gosh, we're still having the same resistance to inclusion, even though we're doing all these disability awareness activities. They're all wrong. They're focusing on the disability. They're focusing on the physical or mental condition and not focusing on societal responses to disability. And so I realized that if we were actually going to make a difference, we had to change what we were doing with disability awareness. We had to teach kids directly about access and inclusion. We had to teach them about assistive technology. We needed to teach them what ableism was. We needed to teach them about disability history, disability rights, and disability justice. And we needed to teach them about identity, disability identity, and how we refer to people, the language that we use. And so that's when I actually wrote a book. And I'm going to hold it up for those who are watching. It's Beyond Awareness, Bringing Disability into Diversity Work in K-12 Schools and Communities. And it's all about changing what we focus on when we do disability awareness. Our society is so big on disability awareness and inspiration porn, and we're not going to eradicate it, right? We're not going to eradicate disability awareness from our school system. But as an educator, I know we can transform it. We can transform it. We can replace what people are doing with updated, research-based, respectful, disability-led conversations about disability. And so that's why I wrote this, hoping to get educators who want to do it in a way that is respectful, that is what I like to call the right way. And I'm sure there are some things that will change in my book and my formats, because we learn and we grow and time changes society. But for now, we need to stop focusing on simulation activities and start focusing on things that really are going to socially have a social impact for now and for the future.
Yeah, and that's wonderful that you wrote that book, and I hope viewers and listeners will check it out. And I know you have some other books, some children's books as well, and you also host your own podcast. And look at those books up there. Hold it up.
So I'm just showing my Ed Roberts Champion of Disability Rights book.
And then the other one is
this is a trifold laminated educator's guide. It's kind of a Cliff Notes version of the book. So it's everything that is in this book, but in a Cliff Notes. So I really like this. For I know educators, they're going to want something that's really easy to access.
Yeah, that's great. And so it's about to time out on us, but how can people follow your work, follow you online? And then I think it will time out on us. Go ahead.
So DianaPastoraCarson.com is where you can find my website. I'm on social media as well, Diana Pastora Carson on Instagram and Facebook, and I have a Beyond Awareness Facebook page as well.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Diana.